So, hello and welcome to my channel, Sir Ian Livingstone. It's so lovely to have you here.
No, it's great to be here. Great to speak to you.
Yes, well, I was lucky enough to get to talk to you in person at Dragon Meet, where you were hosting the awards, and one of the charities that I work with, UK Games Therapy. We won this award for the charity, and you were there to pass it over. A magnificent crystal orb, which was
Yeah.
my excuse to talk to you. And I always see you at Dragon Meet. Is that one of your favorite events? Because I know you do a lot of cons.
Yeah, I love Dragon Meet. I mean, we started Dragon Meet back in the early 80s. I mean, I don't know how we actually lost the name, but it was originally a Games Workshop event. So
Yeah.
it's always been close to my heart. And of course, it's just great to go there. It's just not far from where I live.
Mm.
It's good to see all my gaming chums and look at new releases and just talk
Yeah.
about my books, talk about games, just talk games for a whole day. It's brilliant. And of course, it's
Brilliant.
great to get that award away. I mean, I judged the entries and really wanted to give the winner what I thought was most appropriate, the trophy, because I recognize the power of play is a really
Mm.
important part of learning as well as social good and enjoyment. So it was good to do that.
Yeah, I watched your TED talk on well, play being essential to living, actually, and I thought that was a really beautiful message. So I loved that. And it's always great to see you at Dragon Meet because Dragon Meet is a wonderful place to meet all your nerdy friends. And then you have people and you just spot people and you're like, "Oh, they were there at the beginning, they invented this." So what does the gaming community mean to you? I mean, are you followed around? Do nerds trail you from table to table? And how is it? What's it like being a nerd king?
Well, we started Games Workshop in 1975, so I've been nerding along for many, many years.
You don't know any other way of living.
I'm very proud of it as well, to be part
Yeah.
of Nerd Central.
Yes.
And I just like the community of the games players. And of course, I love playing games. And I turned my hobby of playing games into a lifelong career and enjoyed every minute of it. That's why I'm never going to retire.
Yeah.
Obviously, long past retirement age, but what
Never.
else would I do? So
Yeah.
I want to carry on being part of the community, still creating content for the community. And, as I say in my talks, life is a game and just keep
Yeah.
on playing.
Life is that should be a t-shirt that you do. And so how do you work in gaming to your daily life? So is it like I'm going to go to work and as part of work I will be doing some play testing or I will be working on some games? Do you have like a games night set aside with a certain group of buddies? Like how do you fit gaming into your life as a gaming professional?
Well, games is totally my life in terms of
You're like
uh,
never not playing,
what
I guess.
I can play. Um, so
What's
today, of course, it's different because I'm taught to run stuff, but I can be part of other people's
Mm.
enterprise. So I still enjoy designing board games, although I haven't had any published for a long time. I still enjoy writing Fighting Fantasy game books. This year's the 40th anniversary of Death Trap Dungeon, and I'm thinking about writing a sequel in
Ooh,
time for Fighting Fancy Fest, which is on the 7th of September at the
so
University of West London, where all the kind of super hardcore Fighting Fancy fans will be assembling for us to release new stuff and talk about Fighting Fancy game books. So I'm very much part of the Fighting Fancy community, of course. I wrote Dice Men. I'm now working with Jonathan Green to write Magic Realms, which is the art and artists of Fighting Fancy, because the art
wow.
is so central and so much part of the success of Fighting Fancy. It's time that people saw a lot of it in one volume. So Magic Realms is
Yeah.
will be on its way this year sometime. And then there's games design. I also part of a general partner in a venture capital fund now. We invest in
Mm.
game studios, mainly video games, because for the last 30 odd years I've been in the video games industry after selling out a Games Workshop.
Yeah.
I was chairman of IDOS, chairman of Sumo Group, and very much involved in some really fantastic games companies, as well as indie games companies like Playdemic, who developed Golf Clash, and
Mm.
is also part of Mediatonic, who created Fall Guys. And I'm currently working with a studio called Pixel Count, who are creating this incredible RPG game called Kinseed, which is
Ooh,
available on Steam. So I work in games in multiple ways, from design to being part of investing in studios, helping new teams kind of leverage my 47 years in the game industry, all the mistakes I made over the time, trying to give advice. And of
yeah.
course, on the other side, about giving talks around the world, and also pushing the point about the power of play, how
Mm.
important it is from a social, cultural, and economic standpoint, and certainly from an educational standpoint, the way
Yeah.
that games require you to problem solve and learn intuitively and
Mm.
interact and strategize, and you can fail in a safe environment, and it brings people together in
Yeah.
such a wonderful way, in a wonderful social way. I mean, there's so much good that's not known about games. People, as you say, historically just call you a bunch of nerdy geeks, and
Mm.
yet
Mm.
it's games help define us as who we are as human beings. When we enter this world, we learn through play. Play is absolutely natural, and you're
Yeah.
never too young to start playing games and never too old to stop. So consequently, I'll never stop. Here I am in my room with 1,500 board games. And yes, we do play board games. I've been running a games night club since the 1980s with the same people in it: Steve
What?
Jackson, Peter Molyneux, and
Ah,
we play every week.
how do you
Uh,
get an invite to this nightclub? Can I get on
I'm,
the VIP list?
I'm
What?
afraid. No, we're five people now. It was six, but we lost one. We never replaced it because I'm the secretary of the Games Night Club, and
Yeah.
I've written 644 newsletters so far for a circulation of six.
I love that. And I hope you publish them as soon as possible because I think that
They're
would be
published.
fantastic.
They are published, but only to the recipients. So,
This club is exclusive. You're making me so jealous. I never knew I
well,
wanted
people
it.
have tried to come in. TV's tried to film it. We just said no to everybody. So you
It's
can't be
like,
yourself in front of cameras and
no,
strangers.
no, no. This is probably like a secret society that's secretly running the world, like in an Illuminati way.
Not
But
really,
who
but
knows?
it's so we keep a record. I keep a record of all the games we play. I mean, there's points allocated for everyone at the end of the year. Total them up, and the winner gets the trophy, which should get engraved. So it's been engraved since 1986, and
Ian, I think I love you. Hearing this story has made me like you. This is even so much more. So you actually have a trophy. That makes my heart melt. And like
yeah,
they're like clearly your best friends forever, forever best gaming buddies.
yeah. Well, games do bring people together. I mean, they've kept us
Yeah,
together for sure
yeah,
over the years, and it's like, and then you can just become the
yeah.
smiling assassin without anyone taking offense.
That's true. And can I ask you, I I kind of got into Dungeons and Dragons. My dad helped me explore. My dad got me into all the good things in my life, like Star Trek and gaming and fantasy and everything. But I always remember my first dungeon master, and I always remember my favorite dungeon masters. And I wondered who has been your favorite dungeon master? Is that a fair? You've probably had so many.
Uh, well, I used to DM quite a lot of games myself, but as a player, I had my beloved.
You can say I am my favorite dungeon
No,
master.
I'm not. I'm not. I'm my favorite dungeon master. I'm just saying I did both,
Yeah,
and I had a character, a barbarian called Amvar the Barbarian. He's getting a bit old, a bit long in the
yeah,
tooth. He's,
yes, yes.
he's
Is
finding
that
a sword a little bit heavy to pick up these days and
yeah,
swing it around his head. But to your question, the favorite one was Albie Fiore, who used to be at Games Workshop, one of our
yeah,
first employees. He had an amazing imagination, and a lot of his dungeons were actually published in White Dwarf. Halls
mm,
of Fame was perhaps one of his most famous ones, and he was a great raconteur and storyteller. So
yeah.
always loved going in Albie's dungeons.
Brilliant. I'm gonna look up Albie's works, and I was gonna say as well. I have so much admiration for people who can design games because I think for me, I can come up with weird and wonderful ideas for fantasy magical adventures. But but putting together a rule system and making it playable so anybody can pick up the dice and it makes sense. So when you're playing a role-playing game, what aspect do you kind of lean into more? Do you love the role playing, or do really good rules really turn you on?
No, I'm more on the theatre on the fly, the
Yay.
comic um,
The improv, the
stories
kind
that
of,
are created, the spontaneous humor and storytelling that comes out of people conversing over some bizarre event that's happening on the tabletop.
yeah.
So rules are there as kind of to be used to determine success or failure. But I don't think. I mean, as a dungeon master, I was never hardcore about the rules. I was very loosey goosey with it because
That's
it's the idea is to have fun. You're storytelling and you're part of group theatre, and just let everyone just riff off that event.
I'm so glad you said that. When people complaining about my dodgy rule remembering at the table, I can say, well, look, Sir Ian Livingstone thinks we should be about. But I totally agree. I love the
It's
idea.
a personal thing, isn't it? Some
Yeah.
people are more in
Yes.
the kind of
Well, I unfortunately,
math-based entertainment, and I'm in the word-based entertainment.
yes. Well, unfortunately, when you invented all these amazing games and you brought D&D over, little did we know you were opening space for what we call min-maxers and rules lawyers who would flood our tables and remind us of the rules and the things that we were breaking. So I love that. I think if you have a good balance of people at the table, it works out really well. So you have the people that just want to imagineer up, the daring escape, and then you have the other people who are like, well, actually, you wouldn't be able to
No,
roll.
no, you can't do that.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, I can.
I know. I love yeah, I love an obliging DM. And whenever I run a game, I'm always of the opinion, if it sounds really awesome and we can storify it, let's find a way to make it work. Because then we
Yeah.
could all be part of this adventure. So yeah, I agree with you. Um, and going on from that, you've met probably, as the whole game industry was taking shape and becoming a thing, from when you were, playing diplomacy back in the day, you probably met as many people in the games industry that have been influential in it. And I wondered, like, maybe when you were like a child or throughout your career, who has been your inspiration and who are your heroes when you're looking around you or thinking of people who've come before you?
Well, you have to immediately think of Gary Gygax. We first met Gary in 1976 at Gen Con 9 in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. We'd corresponded and talked to him previously when we were getting the D&D license
Yeah.
in the embryonic days of Games Workshop. But when you finally met him, I kind of lived up to expectations, a very gregarious, outgoing raconteur and larger than life character. And it was he who really made D&D happen.
Yeah.
Dave Arnson was a creator and probably came up with the original role-playing system, but it was never took any format or shape. And it wasn't until Gary got hold of it who actually wrote down the rules and made it into a system that people could play. That D&D became a thing as opposed to just an idea for storytelling.
Mm.
And it was great to become his friend, and we had some real good times together. They were always a hoot.
Yeah, your epic drive to get to Gen Con sounded, I loved that so much. And the pictures from your road trip, you
Yeah.
you fit in really well with that whole kind of like summer of love, flower power, time of time of the century. Yeah, that's intense. For me, I think that's really lovely that you got to meet Gary and the two that you had this, because if you hadn't gone over there and pioneered this, and we may have had Dungeons and Dragons years later, or never as it may never have been as big in the UK as it was. So that's really lovely.
I think you'd have got to here eventually, but perhaps in a different format. But yeah, I mean, as you know, I told that story about crossing the states and Dice Men, and it was quite an adventure.
Yeah,
Delivering cars from New York to LA, then one LA
yeah,
up to San Francisco, and then another one over to Chicago, and then we went over to Lake Geneva, then back to New York, and yeah, it was an amazing trip.
And you were inspired by On the Road, right? By Jack Kerouac, is that right?
Yeah,
Which
yeah, exactly.
I
That
love.
spontaneous prose and his love of life, of just living in the moment and just
Mm,
doing it, just feeling
yeah,
it on the moment, was great inspiration. And as a young man as I was, Jack Kerouac was my kind of literary hero.
yeah. I remember discovering Jack Kerouac and Bukowski and those kind of authors, and I was like, it was like a whole other world. So yeah, definitely that kind of alternative lifestyle and freedom. Because from when
Yeah.
I was little, I went to a Catholic primary school and then an all-girls school. So those kind of books about freedom really appealed to me. Um,
Yeah.
and I mean, I feel like you've never ever not written. You're always writing, be that games or books. And, you know, who are your favorite writers? If you get time to relax and read a fantasy book or a business book, what kind of things do you pick up? Would you have time to read if you're playing games and writing your own books?
I don't really read very much these days. I mean, probably like a lot of people, time is a very rare, scarce commodity. But in my youth, I used to read an awful lot. A lot of science fiction, a lot of comic books. Science fiction authors I used to love was Philip K. Dick, Frank Herbert, Zelazny, Robert Heinlein,
Mm,
all those kind of guys. Yeah, I
yeah,
loved the
they were
Larry
great.
Larry Niven.
Yes.
Yeah,
Actually, when you mentioned your old barbarian, I thought about Terry Pratchett's old barbarian. He has like, there's a Conan who's just really aged in that. So, did you ever get into Terry Pratchett in any way? That
I,
he,
I I didn't actually. It was always the American authors I used to like.
yeah, I think,
But I also enjoyed Ian Banks, of course. But
yes.
I always had a preference for the American authors. Don't know why.
Well, Frank Herbert, I think is. I read June all the time. I
Yeah.
find it, and yeah. Have you seen the June movie? What did you think? Do you watch sci-fi movies?
Yes, of course I've seen it. Yeah.
Which is your favorite, the Lynch version or the new version?
Well, they're different, aren't they? You can't really
I know.
compare.
I've got a soft spot for Kyle MacLachlan, and I love David Lynch and Sting in Underpants, obviously, So, but yeah, I feel. I mean, I kind of, I guess I started really getting into like sci-fi and fantasy in the 80s as a little, and the feeling now that June can be a release in the cinema and become a blockbuster because sci-fi is now really accepted as a genre you can go and watch. It
Yeah.
feels so different to when, it was really niche. I mean, I remember at school I would never ever admit to watching Star Trek because then you'd be bullied for the rest of your life. So yeah, it's
Surely not.
I know. Who would have thought? So yeah, so thank you for talking about books as well, because that's kind of part of why I really love talking to other writers and things is trying to figure out. I'm always struggling with imposter syndrome. And I know, like, if I'm writing something fun, I can sometimes pick ideas out from the air or something I've watched or heard or seen. And I always wonder what is the inspiration behind professional, successful writers? Because you've had a billion amazing, wonderful ideas. How do you access the muse or where? I know it's really hard to explain where ideas come from, but do you have an inkling or do you have any processes that help you create, or are you just creative?
I like to think I'm creative. I mean, I used to say read tons of science fiction books, tons of comics, love horror films, and I've always had a pretty good imagination. I love conjuring up events in my mind. I guess maybe that's part of me being an only child. I lived a lot in my imagination as a kid,
Mm,
and yeah, I just like creating creatures, particularly for a particular moment in some of my fighting fantasy game books,
yeah.
and, just scrawling ideas on a paper. I'm always putting notes down on bits of paper and then
So
filing them and saying that can go in my next book. So before I start a book, I've probably been fiddling around with bits for about a year beforehand to and let that all sort of filter around in my head and say, okay, I've got it now. This is
And
what's going to.
do you still keep all your notebooks?
Well, I've got all my original manuscripts for Fighting Fantasy game books, which I used to write in the 80s longhand with a fountain pen. And my girlfriend at the time used to type them up, and then we submit them to Puffin for
Yeah.
put into book format. So I've got all those. I've got all my original maps. I mean, let me just show you a couple of things.
Yay.
So
If you find that trophy for your secret VIP club, you could show us that too.
okay, well, I'm going to show you three things now then.
Yay.
So
And there's
we'll start,
Lara in the
we'll start
background.
off, we'll start off with the trophy. I'm the current holder of the
Yay.
Pagoda Cup.
That's so good. It's an actual real trophy and with
Yeah, it is.
actual.
Here next up is a 1975 original Dungeon Dragon still in its shrink wrap.
Oof.
And a
Amazing.
collector's item number one.
Wow. You please tell me you have a sprinkler system in your house. We
And
must
then these are kind of a maps of I used to write to when I'm writing my Fighting Fantasy game book. So all the notations.
Whoa. What book is that? Which one?
Which one is this one?
That's crazy. That's so intricate. So many locations.
I even see which one that one is. I've just been having them framed because I used to mount them up with sticky back plastic on card, then go into schools and show them up.
Oh.
So I guess it's part of the provenance of actually being destroyed, but never mind.
No, I mean I run the Fighting Fantasy books on Sundays. We go onto my YouTube channel, and all my job is to read them out in and do a good voice for reading them out
And
and give
let the
them,
audience decide.
and then it's up to them. And then if we die, I'm like, look what you've done to us. So I throw the poll up, and
It's
yeah.
funny actually when you do that, because I used to do that in schools, that the kids would always choose the horrendous option, no matter what you tell them.
Yes, they're horrible.
They just want to have the worst time when they're going through a book.
Yeah,
I mean, we used to say you have like, I remember one time there were 150 kids in this room.
yeah.
I'm saying to them, well, here's two statues here. One is it's this dwarf and he's holding out a golden apple, and the one next to him is this sort of demon stuff with this clawed hand. And I'll tell you now, if you go for that one, it's going to sink its clawed hands into your chest, rip out your heart, and eat it.
Ah!
What do you want to do? Clawed hand, and all yelling. Like one person wanted the golden apple, everybody else wanted to die this horrendous death because they thought it was much more exciting hearing what happens to them in a terrible way.
One very traumatized child and the rest going, yay. I mean, we came across that very recently. I can't remember, it would have been Citadel of Chaos or Firetop Mountain, and everyone wanted to play a game of knifey where it was quite a stabby game. And I was thinking, this cannot end well. Do we want to put ourselves in a position where we're all getting stabbed? And they were like, yes, we do. And
Yeah.
So as a chat, we all decided to take the gamble together, and we won the most gold pieces. And the chat were going, see, we knew this was the best choice. And I think I'm very faint of heart. So for me, the Fighting Fantasy books are perfect because they're for kids as well. So they're very moderate. But I was shocked that there was a game of knifey, but we did all enjoy it very much. So I'm excited about Fighting Fantasy Fest in September.
Yeah.
Do you get people cosplaying?
A few people do. We've never made it a thing.
Yeah. No, it
Maybe
ruins it. I think if you make it a thing, sometimes it ruins it
yeah.
rather than people just dressing up because they want to. So
Yeah.
yeah,
It's a kind of a limited audience. It's about the capacity I think is 500 or 400. So it's
yeah.
usually quite full, and we get some guest authors and artists and have talks, and Ian McCoy there a couple of years ago. And see if we can try and get him along again.
Yeah.
He's my favorite artist.
Do
Because
you
he did the
remember?
covers originally of Death Trap Dungeon, Forest of Doom,
Yeah,
the Thing, and City of Thieves.
we're playing Forest of Doom at the moment, and if you buy the package from Steam, you can play through, and the pages, you know, as you know, when you turn them, you hear the page turning over, and you can see those original illustrations. But there's also an option to have them colorized.
Yeah.
And everyone in the chat's like, no, no, you're ruining the originals. This is a
Yeah.
travesty, because that art is so loved. So yes,
Yeah.
that's really lovely. I love that you're doing a tribute to the artist. That's absolutely thrilling. It's funny that it takes so many years to accumulate the art, but then the beauty of that is we will get these gorgeous books just full of it. So I'm really excited for that to happen.
Yes, I think it's really important because I don't, at the time, you don't value the art
Hmm.
as much as it deserves,
Yeah,
because it is so critical to the aesthetic and the appeal of the books. And yet, when you're writing at the time, all those years ago, you didn't quite value it in such high terms as it deserved. But so now I'm kind of trying to get as much of my original art as I can.
yeah. Well,
But
that's
so I've
if you,
still got, when you were talking about Forest of Doom,
yeah.
one,
Oh my gosh, Ian, I'm just so jealous of this room.
there's quite some treasures. I mean, Forest of Doom is somewhere, but here's the original City of Thieves art.
Oh, wow. It's so pretty. It looks
Yeah.
great. It looks great in a frame as well. So you're kind of having to do a bit of archivism, I guess, and find out, because back
Oh,
in
you
the
can see a
day,
lot of paintings that have piled up here. I'm converting one room, another part of the house, into this kind of gallery, but for all the books, because you can see some of the Fighting Fancy books up there. I just run out of space in this room for everything, so
yeah,
converting another room into sort of semi pseudo gallery of Fighting Fancy art and books.
yeah, it will slowly take over the whole house, and I completely condone that. I think that should just be what happens. Um, but I remember when I was researching a book for the company I work for. I had to write a book about the company that came before them. So it ran, you know, the early 90s, and we were sent off to look through these big warehouse, Indiana Jones style storage warehouses, because of course back then all the art was done painted by hand,
Yeah.
and I photographed, or you know, so I mean nowadays we'd be like, so can somebody send me the artwork file for this cover? But actually those original pieces are so precious. And you know, I remember we got a call one day and we said, we found this new site where we might have some archive stuff to look at. Some of it's a bit water damaged, and our hearts were just like, well, you know, the art's so vulnerable in that state, so it's lovely that you're managing to collect them all up and keep them safe.
Yeah, and it's also today, of course, most art is done digitally, so you don't have that
Yeah,
physical wonder to put on your wall, which is a
yeah.
tragedy in any respect. So I hear some artists are going back to traditional methods just because
Mm,
they miss the smell of the paint, they miss the physicality of it all.
yeah,
It's quite interesting that in this digital age there has been a bit of an analog revival, both in
yeah.
board games and books and vinyl records and
Mm,
stuff. So I think that's good to have more of a balance rather than going
yeah.
totally digital.
I agree. I think I work on a magazine called 28, which is all about the hobby and the grimdark mostly. And there's an artist called Martin McCoy, who's a great artist, works digitally, um, but also will tattoo his art. So he still has something tangible, and you can, you know, touch and feel, and then someone can wear it, because it's just that kind of, for me, I'm like, that's wonderful because it's physically out there in the world. You know, you don't have to go in onto a device to look at it. So I do, yeah,
Yeah.
I do love that. And
And
then
of course, Magic Realms. I mean, it's. I think it's so important that the artists are recognized. I mean, I've had
yeah,
the privilege to work with some of the best science fiction artists and fantasy artists in the world. You know, from Ian McCoy to Karl Kopinski and a whole host
mm.
of others. And it's
And some of
amazing
those,
what they do.
sorry to interrupt you, but some of those artists you invited to come and work for you, and then they became artists of that genre also, right? So that's,
Well, Ian McCaig went on to have a stellar career. I mean, he did
yeah.
just I just showed you the City of Thieves
Mm.
cover, and of course he went on to work with George Lucas, and he created Darth Maul, and of course old Zambar Bone with his spike cranium remarkably like the distant cousin of Darth Maul.
Yes. Yes, there should be a crossover episode. But that's a really that's a beautiful symbiosis where one person's creativity can draw someone in from another field of creativity and then spur that on. And also, working in games gives people, humongous creative space and time, because you could be writing about a galaxy far away or monsters and demons. And the relationship between writing and artists, I think, is quite precious, because you come up with the words and then they come up with a representation. I know you used to love writing monsters. That was one of your things, right?
Yeah, I like creating monsters. I mean, I used to do
Yeah.
a lot for White Dwarf when we started a column called Fiend Factory, which again, the collection of monsters from the Fiend Factory column became the Fiend Folio, official Advanced Dungeons and Dragons book, a sequel to the Monster Manual.
Yeah.
And I think I've got 15 of my monsters in the Fiend Folio, and I have the original art of the cover.
Oh, and which can this is I'm awful for asking these favorite questions. Do you have a favorite D&D monster or a favorite monster that you created? I know it's like asking you to choose between your kids, but
I know people say which is your favorite, and I'll say, well, it's like that's my favorite kid, and I got 4 of them, so it's usually give four of everything, 4 monsters, 4 fighting fancy game books, 4 board games,
I
whatever
love
it is.
that. That's such the storytelling writer in you. For my 4 children, I give you 4 monsters. I love that. Um, I
So I think the shape changer of Forest of Doom was one of my favorites because it had that.
so sneaky, the shape changer. What a shocker.
Again, that's another Ian McCoy brilliant piece of art,
Yeah.
because again, this description, which was pretty mediocre, but then he came up with this amazing metamorphosis of this
Yeah.
seemingly
And so early in the book,
Great.
such an ambush.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Well, I guess I always love luring people to their doom, promising them glory and fame and fortune, only for them to fall on poison spikes or getting fried by a dragon. That gives me total joy.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think the shape changer is a pretty excellent monster.
Mm. I mean, there's so many monsters, but
Do you relate to any of the monsters? I'll give you an example. I always feel like a gelatinous cube, because I always feel like I absorb, no, not all through life, but were I to think about this subject, they go through the dungeons like basically absorbing everybody and everyone's emotions. And I'm a bit of an emotion, like I feel all the feelings. So I do relate to a gelatinous cube, and also being quite hungry all the time. So I see myself as like, I'll carry my adventurers along with me. I'm sorry my acidic tummy is burning them to death. But do you, if you had to imagine yourself as a monster, what would you choose? And I realize I'm a weird person and I'm trying to make you be weird with me. So you don't have to be weird.
no, I like weird. I'm very comfortable being weird, but um, there's no monster that immediately springs to mind. Um,
Yeah, I guess I've thought about it for too long, maybe.
yeah,
Well,
it's monsters are pretty awful, aren't they? So I don't really
yeah.
like to see myself as being awful.
Some I think are misunderstood. They're just trying to make their way in a dungeon, and then this party stumbles across them, and they're like, "Oh, I was just here being a slime or an ooze," and you know,
Yeah, I was just
you're
being a rust monster, and you happened to.
yeah, you left your sword too close to the rust monster. I'm sorry about it. I didn't know it was a magic item.
Yeah,
But
but you don't find apologetic rust monsters, do you? That's the thing. All creatures are pretty horrendous. They're out to get you, and I don't see
yeah.
myself as being someone who's out to get people.
Well, I think I'm reading in your book, you had a visit from David Attenborough to your shop.
That was
And he
funny.
may have been coming in to say, I don't like you sending all these dungeoneers down. You are messing with a natural environment that humans shouldn't be in. The argument is there. If you mess with, you mess with the natural environment of the dungeon, it's not your domain. So, but that's wild that you met David Attenborough through a game shop as well. Well, had him in your shop if you didn't meet him. Do you know what I mean?
And I was trying to be funny. It kind of fell a bit around.
I was working in Lush when George Lucas came in, and it must have been the early, 2000s or something. No one else in the shop knew who George Lucas was, Ian. Can you imagine? Because most of the people that worked at Lush were very gorgeous, intelligent women who were not nerds. And I just couldn't think what to say to him. And I said something awful like, I'm a real fan of your work. And then it just scuttled off. And he was very gracious, but I guess you get that. You get the other side of that when people spot you as well.
I get an awful lot of people saying how much they enjoyed their work and my work and what an influence it had on them as people as well, which is very gratifying. It's quite humbling actually, saying it's kind of changed their lives and made them the people they are today. And in tough times in their childhood, their sole gratification was immersing themselves in a fine and fancy game book and having agency of control and yes, those books are kind of lead into rather than the lean back stuff, because you're making all the decisions, and that gave them was really powerful impression on their young imaginations, and that's always brilliant to hear. And
I think it's kind of, in a way, it's you playing on your own as a little, being an only, and creating these worlds, and then inviting in other children who needed an escape into those worlds. Is I think that's really beautiful, and you're definitely on the good side of the alignment chart, 100%. You're definitely not
in games. I always want to be chaotic evil,
yeah,
but everyone wants to be something they're not.
The paladin that's gone rogue. But no, I think that's really beautiful. And I just think there's a certain generosity to people who create a very successful IP and could go on doing that, but you're really interested in giving back. And, one of the things I noted when I was researching for our interview is you really give of your time. You will do interviews for fans and you will show out at conventions and things. I think that's really important to me, because it means that somebody that created stuff that I care about so much has got a really big heart. So a big thank you on behalf of me and the whole gaming community for
Thank you
doing
very
that.
much for say that. But I just like being with the community.
Yeah.
And I like being, sharing stories and meeting people and, finding out what they do.
Yeah.
Never being an ivory tower person. I mean, that's one of the reasons why helped set up the Livingstone Academy in Bournemouth, to have a school where play was important, the power of play was important, and have skills as well as qualifications, know-how as well as knowledge, trying to contextualize knowledge to make people part of a team, the way how games bring people together, or projects to bring people together, because we're all different, but together we can do wonderful things.
Yeah.
Like a dungeon party, you will have your individual skills, whereas in an examination at traditional schools, you're all tested against the same metric, which is crazy, because you can be good at some stuff and rubbish at other stuff. But so I want people to feel good about themselves and see games as a contextual hub for learning.
I think, I love that. My whole life I love sci-fi, but everything's very steered towards dystopia. So I hear your plans for bringing people together, and it makes me think of utopian ideals. So I'm really happy for that you do that. So I guess I've just got a few tinier questions to end up the interview. One is, this is just a random question, but I wondered what you thought of the ITV show Nightmare when that first came out.
That was a long time ago.
I know. I know. I just thought, because that format was so much.
Yeah, influenced by, shall we say.
Yeah. And I mean, that's wonderful.
Well, I mean, it was good. I enjoyed it for what it is. I mean, there's so many things. I mean, there's nothing original. Without Dungeons and Dragons, would we have created Fighting Fantasy? Without Warhammer, would Warcraft have happened? I mean, there's everything is kind of there's never a truly original idea in this world. Everyone's influenced by at least, and sometimes copy, which I'm not that keen on copying ideas, but you can't help but being influenced by stuff that you enjoy.
Yeah.
So you just have to accept that. As long as you can have ownership of your own content, your own intellectual property, and your own trademarks, I think people should be free to do what they like. I mean, you can't imagine a world where with only one car because nobody else is.
Yeah. There's only Pokemon and no other card games.
Yeah.
Um, but would you have ever, if you'd had a kind of televised show based around one of your adventures, do you think it would have looked like Nightmare, or would you have had, like, I guess, would you have ever wanted to do anything like that? Just take one of your games and put it in a studio or into a TV program or anything like this?
Well, I think the production values were prohibitive, and we've had a number of discussions over the years to make it look true to what the books were.
Yeah.
The production costs would have been so high. Having
Mm.
said that, I'm currently having some discussions with a unnamed company, shall we say, about looking at it again from a fighting fantasy standpoint. So whether that happens, there's an awful lot of hurdles to get
Mm.
over before it happens, but there's genuine interest in the format.
Well, I was one of my favorite games companies has always been Sierra Games. They did things like King's
Sierra,
Quest. Yeah.
Sierra, yeah.
And Ken and Roberta Williams, I think, I really think they're fantastic. I love what they did. And they revisited one of their first adventures, Colossal Cave, and they took it to a virtual reality environment. I'm sure you know all this already. This is what you work in. But it just really excited me as a grown up that these really loved adventures can come back in different, they can come back in virtual reality, they can come back as TV, they can be on Netflix and things. My goodness, Witcher becomes a TV series.
It's so important though that the IP is respected and it's true to the original format.
Yes, because the fans get so angry, Ian.
Hollywood has never been very good at translating games into the silver screen, but we only have to see how well they did The Last of Us to say that it's possible to be true to the IP and give it the respect it deserves, rather than just taking the theme and running with it in traditional Hollywood fashion. So
yeah,
as we see the power of games getting bigger and bigger, I think we'll see more respect shown to it as a source.
Well, the power, and also people in Hollywood want money, and people who play games, especially if you're playing Warhammer, are known to spend a lot of money. I am really curious to see how they televise Warhammer, because if they don't, I kind of want it to be big Hollywood with loads of explosions and space marines flying everywhere, but at the same time, that satirical 80s thing that underlie a lot of the writing is definitely going to be lost. I'm 100% sure.
Well, I'm not sure it will be lost. A, because Henry Cavill is a Warhammer fan.
Yay! Yeah.
Secondly, I believe there's an agreement between Amazon and Workshop that there has to be sign off on the creative work, whatever that be. So the approval process, I think, will be quite rigorous. The Workshop is so protective about their IP, and rightly so. So I don't think they'll be able to take 40K to a place the way a Workshop wouldn't want it to go. So I think you don't have to worry about as much.
I like to worry about these things.
We all know that 40K is a sort of grim, dark, dystopian world of evil empires and evil magic, and it's Space Marine versus arrest, and it's ongoing war between mutants and aliens and all that stuff. And it's such a great universe. The last thing Workshop would want, because all their eggs in the 40K basket would be for Hollywood to destroy that aesthetic. Oh my gosh. So I don't think that would happen.
I agree. I wrote a song for one of my videos, and the song was called Space Marines, Are They Good or Bad? And every single comment was like, all Space Marines are bad. So we all know, that's the universe. Well, thank you so much for all your time. My last question is, what's left? What would be your dream project to do? Or are you working on your dream project still? Or is there anything that, would be like a goal that you'd really love to get done or see happen?
Well, I still don't think I've designed a good enough board game yet. So I've had about 7.
You think you haven't designed a good enough board game?
I've designed some. I've written some good Fighting Fantasy game books. I'm happy with some of those.
How many
But
how many board games have you written, Sir Ian?
how many board games have I had published? Well, I think 7, but
Okay.
I haven't done a classic one that I could really say I designed that.
Yeah.
I've had some that are okay with. So that's one thing I want to do. I definitely want to get involved with the silver screen around Fighting Fantasy at some point.
I want you to do that too. Any help you need, let me know. I will support you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And
I think that will happen.
And I'll never stop writing. Work and play is the same for me. So just keep going.
Well, thank goodness that we've got you. And yes, you are to keep writing and playing for all of us little nerds out there. And thank you so much for giving me some time today.
Absolute pleasure.
Man of adventures, wielder of dreams, he spent a lifetime on fantasies. Stalwart inventor of games for all, come join his party.